Hi everyone, Paolo here again, and welcome to my channel. Today is book number 14 out of the 52 book challenge, wherein I plan to read one book a week for a span of 52 weeks, or 52 books in a span of a year. And this week's book of choice is entitled How Will You Measure Your Life, written by Clayton Christensen. So it's quite interesting in terms of, how can we really measure our life? What are the different metrics, strategies for us to really say that we have lived a fulfilled and successful life? And what's interesting about this is the author of the book, Clayton, is actually also the author of the famous book entitled Innovators Dilemma. And I think he's a professor in Harvard Business School as well. So let's get at it. As usual, I have my five key takeaways, starting with rather hygiene versus motivation factors. So before I move on to drilling down top five key takeaways, I'd like to start with this opener slide, right? Wherein when you think about it, life is what is life, right? Life is a sum of all of our choices. The choices that we make on a daily basis accumulate, and that becomes our life. The least thing we want to happen is at the end of the day, in our deathbed, we would regret all of the things that we could have done better, and so on and so forth, right? So when you think about the different priorities, you can cluster them into three key things, right? It's one, wealth, career, success, money, and so on and so forth. Some people prioritize majority of their life accumulating wealth, while others, the focus on the other two, which is family, relationships, love, and finally, it's health, well-being, and so on and so forth. It depends on each person which he or she feels is more important to him or her. But it's not the realization of the book is not about choosing one over the other, but to really live a fulfilled life, it's about striking a balance between all of these three core aspects. And this book teaches you, how the framework, the how can you actually uh, better balance, strike a balance between these uh, three core aspects of life. So the first one, my first key takeaway is hygiene versus motivation factors. So it starts with really understanding what makes you tick, right? So he starts by defining hygiene factors. So let's relate it to a typical employee whenever they're choosing for a job, or if you're canvassing job options and so on and so forth. Hygiene factors focus more on the tangible things, right? The compensation, the pay, the whether or not the boss, the leaders are good, and so on and so forth. As compared to motivation factors, which is more on the fulfillment of work, right? Whether or not the work that we do actually makes a big impact, right? So again, these two factors are not greater over the other, right? There needs to be some sort of balance between these two. So, for example, when you see a lot of people who are really miserable with their lives, mainly because they get stuck in a rut by doing the same thing over and over again in a job that they aren't really happy, but because they have a lot of mortgages, they have a lot of payments that they need to settle every month. They're stuck in that job, they feel depressed, and it trickles down, it affects the different aspects of their life as well. So that's because people who are miserable, based on the book, they tend to solely focus on the hygiene factor, which is the amount of pay, the compensation, the benefits. But because they are not, they're not addressing their motivation factors, they feel that lack of sense of fulfillment because, maybe they're not doing any fulfillment work. Maybe they're in a role that they're not really passionate about, but because of the mounting expenses, the month on month deadlines that they need to meet, they're stuck within that job, right? So the key trick here is whenever you're assessing a life decision, it's really understanding the hygiene and motivating factors, right? Does this compensate well? Does it meet my financial requirements? But at the same time, does it actually make me fulfilled, make me happy? Am I going to work with the spring in my shoe, right? Wherein I'm excited to go to work because I feel that whatever I do can make an impact. So again, it's a balance between these two, hygiene and motivation factors. So it's really asking, um, is this job meaningful for me, right? The second key takeaway is resource allocation paradox, the innovator's dilemma. So again, Clayton was the author of the Innovator's Dilemma. It's basically, the challenge of big companies. Whenever there's a disruptor, for example, a great example there would be Netflix versus Blockbuster. So during that time, Blockbuster was the number one movie rental company, right? They commanded a huge brand. They had multi-million dollars in revenue, even billions perhaps. And there was this upstart Netflix who kind of threatened their business. But because majority, they felt that they were sizable enough, that Netflix was just a company that would eventually fold, they disregarded. Lo and behold, Netflix grew to the movie giant it is today, and Blockbuster ended up in bankruptcy. The main nugget of wisdom in that story is, whenever you're the incumbent, whenever you're already stuck in the status quo, you should always be in the lookout of potential disruptors, because although it may hurt your business in the short term, um, in the long term, making those adjustments can either make you survive or even thrive by creating and adjusting, pivoting to that to that, what you call this, disruption, no? So the resource allocation paradox aligns with this, because a lot of companies tend to really focus on short-term gain without looking into the long-term impact, right? Mainly because in terms of the KPIs we're measured on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. Because of this KPIs, because of these rules, right? Our performance metrics is tied to this. We tend to be biased towards making decisions that we can reap the benefits right away. But in fact, we must, as leaders, we must also perform at the same time transform. In other words, we need to bridge a balance between delivering results in the short term, but and also keeping a strategy in mind that would have a long-term effect, a long-term positive effect, right? Again, this strategy, this plan, is nothing but good intentions unless it is effectively implemented. So again, action is key. Uh, job uh, job done is better than perfection, right? As the saying goes. How can we relate that to the family, right? So I talked about business, but again, it's about striking a balance of family, love, relations, and even your health and wellness. So, for example, if you value your family, again, in our world, there's limited resources such as time, energy, money, right? So, similar to the resource allocation paradox, we feel sometimes people tend to feel that it's the obligation of your wife, of your kids, or your spouse, your family to understand that you're busy at work. Because of this, you don't allocate as much resources to them. Your time, your energy. When you go home, you're not that engaged with your children, and over time, this accumulates, and you tend to become distant to them. So the nugget of wisdom there is really treating it as if you also make an investment in the different aspects of your life, not just pouring all of your energy, time, and resources in your career, but also striking a balance and making time for your kids, for your wife, to enjoy um, the little moments with them, right? So resource allocation paradox. The third key takeaway is people buy products to get a job done. I think there's a famous saying, right, wherein people don't buy the drill. What they really want is the hole, right? So people buy things, buy products to solve a solution or to solve a problem rather. So it's about as leaders, we must understand based on our target customers, what job are they trying to get done, right? Focus on what other people want rather than what you would want to sell, right? So one example here is the milkshake story that Clayton mentioned, wherein he noticed this. He was helping this milkshake shop, where he noticed that at the start of the day, there were a lot of orders similar to the end of the day, right? So when when he asked the owner couldn't, really articulate how come this is the fact. But he did. He asked these people in terms of why were they buying, right? So he found out that people who buy in the morning, it's really commuters for work, right? They like milkshakes because they feel that, you know, it would be their light snack, keep them full on their way commuting to work. It's better versus donuts because, if you think about it, eating donuts in the early of the morning is quite unhealthy. It's even better than bananas because milkshake last longer during their commute. Unlike if a banana, it's you consume it right away and you end up hungry uh, while you're commuting, right? So basically, this insight um, it sparked the interest of the management. How can they cater to the based on this key insight? How can they cater to the how can they make the product better for these target audience, which are commuting to work? So because of this, they wanted to develop a product that would last longer, would be harder to finish, so that it can, commuters can take it with them during the entire commute journey and remain full, all right, at the time that they arrive in their office. So they added, you know, they made it easy for commuters to buy, such as putting a vendo machine and a simple swipe of their card. They can purchase the milkshake. At the same time, they added, uh, you know, fruit bits to add a surprise during their commute and longer for them to finish. At the end of the day, a different market was discovered wherein they noticed that majority of their customers who buy towards the end of the day are really dads together with their son. But the insight here was the reason why they bought their son milkshakes is because they want to feel less guilty of being late for picking up their son, or they want to have that bonding moment. But they noticed that these kids aren't able to finish it right away because they needed to get home before dinner. So because of this key insight, they adjusted the milkshake product to fit into their target audience, which is they made the milkshake less thick so that kids can finish the milkshake faster, just in time for the dad to feel good about giving his son the sweet indulgence of a milkshake. At the same time, being able to finish the product just in time for dinner. So again, the key insight here is people buy products to get a job done, and it's about having that frame, that mindset that we can further segment our customers based on what problem are they trying to solve, right? So those examples, that's key takeaway number 3. The key takeaway number 4 is the invisible hand inside your family. So similar to a company, right, wherein the CEO, or the CEO is the visionary officer, the chief visionary officer, wherein culture is king, right? Regardless if you have an A-list number of employees, if the culture is really bad, you tend to hire the wrong people or you lose great people, right? So As a CEO, you have a deliberate effort to build a great culture within your company. And you can apply the same concept within your family, right? Wherein you need to deliberately build the culture that you'd want to have in your family, a loving and supporting family. One example there is if you want to train your kid for hard work, right? Um, Moms or dads ask their kid to mow the lawn, right? So this simple practice teaches or instills the sense of hard work within a kid. So another example is if you want a kid to develop the love for learning, rather than incentivize him for doing a task, perhaps you can even think of incentivizing them for reading a book, right, or learning a new skill. This would instill in a kid the hunger for learning, to have that curiosity mind, and so on and so forth, right? So one story also highlighted in the book was the lesson from the Greeks, the ship of Theseus. I think this, if you were watching the Marvel, WandaVision, this was also highlighted there. So Theseus was, part, this is a story from the Greeks. He was famous in the olden age because he slayed the Minotaur. I think I spelled Minotaur wrong, but anyways. So Athens wanted to keep the ship. They named the ship after him, and because of his heroism in slaying the Minotaur, so they named the ship after him. After him, and the Athenians wanted to keep the ship seaworthy in the harbor of Athens. So mainly they wanted to, still, although it was named after Theseus, they wanted the ship to still be functional and be seaworthy. So to preserve, they replaced every part of the boat until it was completely saved, changed rather. So at the end of the day, they ask themselves, is this, if they change every part of the boat, is this still Theseus' ship, right? So they related it back to your family or your kids, right? If you don't spend enough time with your kids, your family, they tend to, for example, your kids, they tend to pick up values from different people without you actually instilling them the values, the culture that you'd want to have or build within your family. So are those still your kids? So of course they're your kids, right? But the main point of the story is, there needs to be a deliberate effort in your part, in determining and driving what culture you want to have in a family, what values your kids want to have, and there needs to be an active effort on your end, right? And that's a fourth key takeaway. The last key takeaway is just this once. I love this key takeaway because this is a make or break in uh, any decision that you make, right? Because if you do something wrong one time, or if you make a bad judgment one time, that can impact you, or you tend to become desensitized in making it again in the future, perhaps. Or if you make something illegal, right, you tend to justify it that you're able to do and get away with the past. So one key takeaway there is just this once is very risky. It's very important for you to know and understand yourself, to know what are your core principles, and stick to it 100% of the time. Versus 100% versus 98%. Decide what you stand for and stick to it. So the example given in the book here was, for example, if you were a basketball varsity player, and then every Sunday you religiously go to church with your family, and this was tradition ever since growing up. And suddenly, you've been in a losing streak for several years, but finally, you make it to the finals, game 7, the last game, and it's a championship. And your coach wanted to ensure you get the W, you get the win, and he asked the entire team to practice on Sunday. So the question is, will you make an exception to attend this one time on a Sunday and break tradition? So the author of the book said that although he knew that it was a critical game, he still decided to go to church and not attend practice. The main nugget of wisdom there is you must really understand what are your core principles and do not and stick to it and do not deviate from it. Mainly because in the course of your life, you're gonna encounter multiple temptations to make illegitimate decisions, bad decisions perhaps, if you don't have a clear understanding of what your core principles, core values are, there's a huge risk that you may justify in your head that, just this once. This just this once instance can eventually lead you down a path of, something irreversible. So again, it's very important, to know and understand your values and stick to it 100%. Not 99, not 98, but 100%. So again, those are the key takeaways for today. How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton M. Christensen. I hope you learned a lot. I enjoyed the book, and if you enjoyed this summary, I've summarized, 13 other books over the past 13 weeks. And if you haven't subscribed and viewed my channel, please log on to youtube.com, search Paolo Balinas,